Yamuna Tira
Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama,
Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Radha Kunj Bihari, Radha Kunj Bihari, Radhe.
Jaya Radha Kunj Bihari, Radha
Kunj Bihari, Radhe.
Radhikam
Vandeyam Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavascha Shri Rupam Sadhakatam Sahajanam Tam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parirasahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakambikam Cha He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopesha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gauraki Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sute Devi Paramami Haripriye Vanchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhaiva Cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namah Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Namine Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
So, which verse are we discussing today? Who remembers? What's that? 8 to 12, yes. We got all the way through the first word of the verse last time. So we'll see if we can make a little more progress today. So would somebody like to read the verse? You can read this with translation.
Amanyatvam adambhitvam ahimsa sante arjavam acharya yopasnam socham sthairyam atma vinigraha indriyaste tesu vaikramyam ahankara evacha janma mrityu yara vyadhi dukha dasu dosa nadarsana. I read the translation directly.
Yes.
Humility, pridelessness, non-violence, tolerance, simplicity, approaching a bona fide spiritual master, cleanliness, steadiness, self-control, renunciation of the objects of sense gratification, absence of false ego, the perception of the evil of death, of birth, death, old age and disease, detachment, freedom from entanglement with children, wife, home and the rest, even-mindedness amid pleasant and unpleasant events, constant and unalloyed devotion to me, aspiring to live in a solitary place, detachment from the general mass of people, accepting the importance of self-realization, and philosophical search for the absolute truth. All these I declare to be knowledge, and besides this, whatever there is, maybe, is ignorance.
So, these terms that were discussed here, Srila Prabhupada explains, these are a process for acquiring knowledge. And we discussed last time that knowledge has the goal of creating some better outcome for us. Right? So we're always in thirst of knowledge. But most often, our knowledge that we're acquiring for is how we can try to enjoy more sense enjoyment. So what new things I can see, what new things I can do, what activities here, there, what I can buy, where I can go. And it's all around the material platform of sense enjoyment. So we work to acquire lots of knowledge, whether it's knowledge in a particular field so that I can earn some income, or there's knowledge about how to do certain activities. These are all, with the goal of trying to find some happiness, some pleasure. But we know all of the material sense enjoyment, it always, unfortunately, ends in frustration because one does not become satisfied. So Krishna here is speaking about the processes to acquire real transcendental knowledge. And that transcendental knowledge, as we discussed, it encompasses, in essence, three things. Knowing who am I, knowing who is the Supreme, and the relationship. Okay? And in the context of this verse, it's knowing the distinction between I and the Kshetra. And who is the Supreme Knower. So I is one knower, the Jiva, the Supreme Knower, the Lord, and the matter, including this material body. Right, so this constitutes complete knowledge. Sounds so simple, but it's not so easy. So Krishna is giving here these different ways to acquire knowledge, right? So we discussed last time in Prabhupada comments in the first paragraph of the purport, what is the most important or the essential of all of these? Which one of these?
Humility.
Any other guesses? Humility is one we discussed, but what is the most important?
The false ego. The sense of false ego.
Sense of false ego, okay.
I mean, all of them are important.
Okay, there you go. So all of them are important.
Surrendering and accepting spiritual master.
Okay, that maybe we can say is the second most important. But the principal knowledge, process of knowledge, the most important point here.
Detachment.
Okay, that's important. Huh?
Self-realization.
Self-realization. Go a little bit further.
Philosophical search.
Not quite philosophical search. What?
Devotional service.
Devotional service. But what kind of devotional service?
Unavoidable devotional service.
And one more characteristic Krishna gives.
Consistent.
Constant. So constant and unalloyed devotion. And so Prabhupada says in the middle of the first paragraph, of all the descriptions of the process of knowledge, the most important point is described in the first line of the 11th verse, which is Mai Chanannaya Yogena Bhaktir Avyacharami. The process of knowledge terminates in unalloyed devotional service to the Lord. Because unalloyed devotion, that is the perfection of all activity. That is the most perfect activity that the jiva, the living entity, can do. When it comes to the point of doing pure devotional service, unalloyed, that's what unalloyed means, pure, you have reached the pinnacle. Right? There's no greater activity for experiencing perfection of life, happiness and bliss. So this is the ultimate process of knowledge, is to perform devotional service. So these other processes, humility, pridelessness, non-violence, if they're not connected to pure bhakti, they won't achieve the result. So we see humility in society. Maybe not so much today, but we see it. Right? We see non-violence in society. But these different, simplicity, tolerance, even this understanding of, birth and death, if it's not connected to pure bhakti, it will not give the result. Right? So all of these other processes, they must be connected ultimately to this pure devotion. So this is the most important, Prabhupada says. And so then Prabhupada says, how to come to the process of pure devotional service? What must one do? We said maybe the second most important.
Bona fide surrender to bona fide spiritual master.
We must surrender to a bona fide guru who can teach us about nuclear physics,
Bhakti.
Unalloyed devotion.
unalloyed devotion, constant unalloyed devotion, right? Because the spiritual master has seen the truth, as Krishna says in the 4th chapter, he can reveal it to us, right? Just like if you've seen some great treasure buried in the forest, you can then tell others where it is. But you have to have seen it first yourself. So the guru, the bona fide guru, having seen the truth, can reveal it to others. So this is the means and how we come. Right? So the most important we've established, the process we've established. In all of these different processes, how does one acquire all of these and perform, be humble, prideless? What is the all-in-one process? Where do all the good qualities develop? From what? Practicing devotional service. One doesn't need to artificially try to become humble, try to become this, that, simplicity. By doing bhakti as one purifies, because these are the natural qualities. Right? So Prabhupada says in the purport, all the good qualities of knowledge develop in one who has attained the stage of devotional service. So again, these are not necessarily qualities of us, they're qualities of acquiring knowledge. Okay, so then we discussed humility. So anybody remember or any realizations on what is humility?
Be servient to others.
Okay, so be a servant to others. That is a good expression of humility. Yeah. What else?
No sense of pride, no sense of false ego.
No sense of pride or false ego. Yeah, that is aspects of humility. What else?
Giving respects to all and not necessarily asking for respect back.
Offering respects to others and not expecting respect in return. Yeah, that's part aspects of humility. What is the definition of humility we talked about last time? Do you remember? Is humility low self-esteem?
No.
Is humility thinking one incapable of doing anything?
No.
So he said last time that Prabhupada tries to summarize a very deep concept with this idea that humility means to have an accurate understanding of who I am. Right? When we say somebody has a big ego, why do we say that? It's because we think they have an inflated sense of who they are. Right? They think they're someone greater than they are. That's what we talk about when we socially or colloquially speak about, ego. Right? So humility means to have an accurate assessment of who I am. And so, who am I?
Servant of the Lord.
Servant of the Lord. A tiny, infinitesimal spark of the Supreme Lord. Now, a spark of something extraordinary, the Supreme Lord, but small. And so, when one acts in humility, they understand that whatever one is doing, it is only being enabled by the mercy and will of the Supreme Lord. So, when one acts in the mood of humility, it doesn't mean one doesn't work to do extraordinary things. Like Srila Prabhupada. He did extraordinary things. He was very bold, very ambitious. If you read Prabhupada Lilamrita, and then you read, any other biographies of great, tycoons and businessmen, you'll see very common characteristics. Very bold, very visionary, taking even some risks, very determined, high energy, these very impeccable qualities. But Prabhupada did it with the utmost humility, knowing, I am not the ultimate doer. And that is where the distinction occurs. So, humility doesn't mean, I am an infinitesimal tiny spark, I can't do anything, I'll just sit. That's not humility. That's not having the accurate sense of who I am. An accurate sense is, I am part and parcel of Krishna. Separate from Krishna, I can do nothing. But connected to the Supreme Lord, whatever He desires to use me as His instrument, it may happen. So, humility does not mean softness, weakness. It means acting with good, strong understanding of who is the ultimate doer, and acting in that understanding. Right? That Krishna is enabling. And so we talked lots about humility last time. Prabhupada speaks in a prior couple chapters in the purport that says, humility is on the greatest display. Anybody remembers? When is humility on the greatest display?
When nobody is watching.
When one is what?
When nobody is watching.
Yeah, when nobody is watching. That is always great.
Under distress.
Out of distress. Prabhupada says, when one is very qualified,
Yeah, yes.
yet is humble. That's humility. It's easy to be humble when we don't have qualifications.
Yes, yes, for sure.
When you're going to play tennis and you don't know how to play tennis, it's very easy to be humble. I stink. I'm not very good. It's easy to be humble, right? Right, Arjun? Yeah. But when you start to get good, I'm pretty good now. I can beat you. I can beat you. So real humility occurs when one is very qualified, very able, actually also accomplishing extraordinary things. Yet remains in clear understanding who is the doer. That's humility. And it's the most potent display. Right? And we see this in our great acharyas. The extraordinary humility, yet accomplishing amazing things. Lord Nityananda was so humble. His Lord Balaram, how can be more able or qualified? Yet door to door he would beg, straw in mouth, falling to his knees, begging to chant the holy names of the Lord. So when we study our acharyas, we get to see these moods of humility. Because again, sometimes we mistake humility with low self-esteem. I can't do anything. Or I'm not going to do anything. I want to be humble. I won't do it. That's not humility. Humility is to do, but do the proper understanding. And ultimately, humility resides where?
Heart.
In the heart. Right? What is the consciousness? Yeah, we may speak certain things. We may even do certain actions. We should do them. But ultimately, we want to try to really inculcate inculcate this strong mood of humility. Because with humility, one can be constant in devotional service. Right? Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says, Kirtaniya Sadahari. It happens, one can chant constantly when one is humble. More humble than a believer. Okay? So, it's a very important aspect, but we could take a whole another session on this one. So, otherwise no one will come back and say we'll never finish this verse. So let's read, we'll start from the third paragraph. We left off we read the first two paragraphs. So let's read the third paragraph, which is carrying forward some of the other terms here.
The tolerance one?
Non-violence. Bottom of 3
Yeah.
5.
Thank you. Non-violence is generally taken to mean not killing or destroying the body, but actually, non-violence means not to put others into distress. People in general are trapped by ignorance in the material concept of life, and they perpetually suffer material pains. So, unless one elevates people to spiritual knowledge, one is practicing violence. One should try his best to distribute real knowledge to the people so that they can become enlightened and leave this material entanglement. That is non-violence.
Okay, so let's talk about non-violence. Prabhupada gives a nice broad definition of non-violence. So what does he say? What is non-violence?
Not putting others in distress.
Not putting others in distress. Okay? So often when we think about non-violence, we think, don't hurt somebody, don't kill somebody, right? Don't enact what we call gross violence. Right? Certainly we say, okay, against each other in the human form of life. Of course, in our Vedic philosophy, that extends to all forms of life. We don't put in distress. Sometimes when we're sitting in the grass, we'll just pick at the grass. What are we doing? We don't even realize it. We are like inflicting harm, right? In such a subtle way. Don't even realize it, right? We'll be sitting in the grass honoring prasad. And we'll be, So Prabhupada is guiding us to think broadly about this concept of non-violence. So the devotee has great compassion for all living entities. Now Prabhupada says that trapped in the material world, material consciousness, one is basically perpetually committing violence. How is that so? In what ways do we see this? That seems almost, no, that can't be true. But how is that in fact the case? What do we see?
Just by breathing, walking, maybe killing, like you walk on the street, you might step on an ant by accident or not see it, or, even any living things in the air, if you breathe them in and out, probably disturbing them in some manner or way. Living in a home and using resources somehow has a cause and effect that can destroy something in nature.
Yeah. So many just incidental activities, driving down the road. How many living entities are harmed by our fast moving vehicle?
But what about, because Prabhupada is saying that not putting others in distress, so can we say also, what about the things that we say by words? It might hurt other people, their sentiments and other things, so that is also categorized as violence.
Absolutely.
Thought by words. Yeah. Even by the thoughts, even they are not, because one thing, the question I had was, because I read it somewhere that in Kali Yuga, what your thought is not counted. Only what you say and your actions. So could you explain that?
Yeah, that concept you're speaking about is related to sins.
Okay.
So thinking of a sinful activity does not constitute sin until it is translated into action.
Okay.
So until it comes to action, but of course thinking about it will ultimately lead to action. But so long as one has not thought about it, it does not lead to the action. But with the exception of Vaishnava Prabhu. Thinking ill of a devotee is so grave that it carries the reactions even without speaking or doing. So one must be very careful in that regard. Not to even think ill of a devotee. Because that. But your context here is right. So if we go to this idea of not giving harm to others, right? So it may not be physical harm, but what other kind of harm can we do to others? Which is actually worse than physical.
Spiritual, psychological,
emotional harm,
emotional.
right? If someone comes and slaps me, that may sting for a little bit. If somebody with their tongue says something, that sting may last for days, months, years. That cuts deep. Right? The physical slap, yes, I'll recover. But the emotional distress we can put someone into is much stronger. Okay? So the tongue is much stronger than the fist, we say. Right? I forgot who was somebody who gave a nice quote on that lines. But so in material life, if you see, most of our activities are to try to one-up somebody else. Trying to make somebody else feel envious of me. Trying to make someone else feel lesser than me. Instead of trying to, uplift myself and someone else, I simply want to push somebody down. And that is the material way of life. That's why Prabhupada says, in the material way of life, you're basically practicing violence. No, I'm vegan. Yes, well, that is great. That is extraordinary. But if it's not coupled with Krishna consciousness, still you'll lead to this aspect. So, real nonviolence extends to not giving harm to anyone, animals, plants, humans. And often, we give harm to those who are closest to us in very sort of unusual ways. Right? Because we'll say things in the mood of frustration or anger that we later think, wow, that wasn't so nice. But that's hurtful. Right? So that's violence. So, as Prabhupada says, giving distress to anybody. So a devotee, we see, never gives distress to anyone. Devotee has no enemies. That's the quality of the devotee. Right?
And even if we are experiencing distress, then also we need to be tolerant, right?
Well, that's the next paragraph. So we'll talk about that a little. Right? So non-violence then brings to the question, what about Arjuna? He's carrying on his back all kinds of weapons. So now how to reconcile that?
Following the instructions of Krishna.
Yes. So sometimes violence is there. It's needed. But violence is not enacted out of one's own false ego. It's enacted under the order of the Supreme Lord. A Kshatriya has to protect society from the disturbances in order to create a peaceful existence for the masses, not to sense enjoy, but to make progress back to the spiritual world. A Kshatriya sometimes has to subdue some aggressors. So as Arjuna misunderstood earlier in the Bhagavad Gita, hey, I should be non-violent. Yes, non-violent in one's own activities, for one's own self-preservation. But under the instruction of the Supreme Lord, under the guidance of Shastra, there is also violence.
So when Arjuna walked into when all the soldiers walked into the battlefield, they were all committing violence because the thought of going and attacking the other party was already there. It is only when it stopped and the Bhagavad Gita started off and the realization came in, is when the distinction of violence and non-violence came in.
Well, remember, the violence doesn't come in and just thought.
It has to be physical action.
Yeah. Physical or emotional, right?
Yeah.
If I'm thinking of committing violence, but the recipient has not perceived that, then I have not. If I have threatened them with violence and now I'm creating anxiety and fear in them, now I've begun the process because I put them in distress, right? And we see this even in devotional service. Sometimes we, knowingly or sometimes unknowingly, we do our devotional service in a means that sometimes we know is going to make somebody else not feel so good. There are these sort of subtle, dark, ulterior motives. The motive should be only for the pleasure of Krishna. But we do it knowing someone else will have some envy. Have some, oh, look at me, and they're not getting to do. These things manifest.
What about if one does devotional service to please the devotees? Is that
That's
now?
great.
No, but then it's like here Krishna is he coming in the picture because that time if one may not perceive as we are doing it for the pleasure, we are just pleasure for the serving the devotee or pleasing. So now how do I reconcile that I'm still in the right path? Or how do I reconcile that is it I'm doing it to get their recognition, or is it really for the pleasure, or is it really for serving? Then how do we draw a line and understand where we are?
Well, so two topics, two aspects of that. First, pleasing the Krishna's devotees is pleasing to Krishna. Krishna says it himself. Better you serve my devotees than me directly. I am more pleased when one serves my devotees. And thus Chaitanya Mahaprabhu said he is dasan, 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 dasan. Servant of the servant. He doesn't want to serve Krishna. No. I want to serve the servant of the servant of the servant. Because that is most pleasing to Krishna. Right? So that is that. Now why I do that, still should be for pleasing Krishna. Right? I know that I don't know how to serve Krishna. But I have some small understanding how to serve my Guru. And my Guru has said, chant your rounds. That is service. Guru has said, read Srila Prabhupada's books. That is service. Guru has said, render service in temple. Guru has said, support the temple financially. Whatever instruction. That is service to Guru. And in service to Guru, I am pleasing Krishna. Right? Now, we shouldn't enter the ulterior or secondary motives. I want to please this person, so that I can get some position, or get some recognition, or get some adoration. Right? So then, and those things, they do come from time to time. Right? That's motive, right? That's mixed now. My motive is not pure. Keep doing, keep rendering service, so that the motive purifies. But the best thing is to at least recognize it. Oh yeah, I'm not quite pure in my Buddha, but let me aspire for it. Right? It's going to happen. But keep serving, because that is a means of purification. But the goal is anyavilashita shunyam, desires. Non-violence is clear? Don't give harm to others, please. Imagine how nice the world would be if we lived in this consciousness. Isn't it crazy that if it's dark outside, we are fearful to walk? Maybe in a strange place. Why? There's just so much threat of violence. Why do we have to lock our doors at night? Is there any confusion as to whose belongings these are? But we have to do it. Right?
Fear of the unknown.
But it's fear of the potential that we know exists. Right? There's that, because there's violence all around us. Again, not only physically, I'm not speaking just, physical violence, but this, this battle, right? This emotional, putting others in distress. So much activity is there. My win is someone else's defeat. We get pleasure in seeing someone else defeated. It's there. If we really analyze, my pleasure is in someone else's failure. Right? These are all very dark and, dirty impurities that exist. But by coming to Krishna consciousness, one can see on a more broader platform and work to never put others in distress. Okay, we can keep speaking about that one too, but we'll move on. Tolerance. Let's read tolerance. I'm going to read that paragraph.
Tolerance means that one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor from others. If one is engaged in the advancement of spiritual knowledge, there will be so many insults and much dishonor from others. This is expected because material nature is so constituted. Even a boy like Prahlad, who, only 5 years old, was engaged in the cultivation of spiritual knowledge, was endangered when his father became agnostic to his devotion. The father tried to kill him in so many ways, but Prahlad tolerated him. So there may be many impediments to make advancement in spiritual knowledge, but we should be tolerant and continue to progress with determination.
What happens to our bhakti when we're not tolerant? It's crazy. We let some external circumstance get in the way of my relationship with Krishna. Somebody didn't acknowledge my service, I'm not going to do it again. An insult, right? I'm letting something externally impact my relationship to Krishna. So now then it begs the question, why am I doing this service? Obviously not for Krishna's pleasure. For some other love. When the motive is Krishna's pleasure, and when the understanding is, I am part and parcel of Krishna, then tolerance is always automatic. It's there automatically. Right? But as soon as there is other motives, tolerance becomes very difficult. Very, very difficult. Okay? So, Prabhupada says, one should be practiced to bear insult and dishonor. Why? There's a very, proverb that says, no good deed goes unpunished. No good deed goes unpunished.
Unpunished?
Unpunished. You do something good, someone will criticize it. It's a fact. It's a fact. It's a fact always. No good deed goes unpunished. Now our job is to not let that happen and to be grateful and to enact gratitude in all the things that we see. But in reality, no matter what good happens, Prabhupada says that the material nature is constituted that way. It's going to happen. Okay? So, if we just try to stop the insults or the criticism or it won't work. Why? It's a fact of nature. So what should we do? Tolerate. Understand. It's going to happen.
It's a wonderful statement actually.
Yeah.
Didn't ever realize that.
But then that is for our own senses of, put it this way, you are being tolerant, but the other person who is instituting that gets more infuriated because he's expecting a kind of reaction or some kind of feedback, so to speak. But when the feedback doesn't come, now that infuriates him more. Isn't that a cause of escalation or cause of distress?
Ultimately, they'll stop trying. Because their attempt to disturb you has been thwarted. They can't do it. They'll give up and they'll go to somebody else. Now, the ultimate benefit is to purify that person of their desire to disturb, of course. But our part is we should tolerate. And also understand. Sometimes we get so bent out of shape when somebody insults something we do or criticizes something we do. It hurts. Just saying, that's material nature. It's going to happen. Nor should we really criticize or think badly of that person. It's conditioning. Tolerate. Prabhupada's tolerance was unshakable and extraordinary. Because what he tolerated would break any other person. Would break them to pieces. What he tolerated. And he tolerated so many things. So many extraordinary things. One of the most painful things we can imagine for him to tolerate was not the 2 feet of snow in New York City wearing dhoti and nylon shoes. Was not being run out of an apartment in southern Manhattan by a crazy drug laden person. Not having to step over people who were passed out from drugs and urinating everywhere. Not having to tolerate so many setbacks and his typewriter being stolen. What we can imagine to be one of the most painful things for him to tolerate was the extreme criticism he was receiving from his godbrothers. That must have been very painful. But Prabhupada tolerated. And even on his last days, when many of his godbrothers are coming to see him and expressing their gratitude, Prabhupada, out of utmost humility, begged for forgiveness. And his godmother said, it is us who should be begging. So, this mood of tolerance is very empowering. Because if Prabhupada had not had tolerance, He might have said, forget it. Better I not do this. Better I protect my name. Better I protect my reputation. He didn't care. He was Vyavasatmika Bhakti, fixed on the instruction of his Guru, with humility. His tolerance wasn't defiance. Sometimes we say tolerance is, forget you, I'll do what I want. That's not tolerance. That's defiance. It's a difference. Tolerance is coupled with this humility. Right? So, and when we are tolerant, one can remain, as Prabhupada says, he can continue in their progress with determination. So, expect to endure obstacles. Expect it. Don't expect a pothole-free road driving in Michigan. You just expect to find potholes. Yes, there will be some impediments in the practice of devotional service, but tolerate them. And most often we are not tolerant, again, of those we are closest to. We have high expectations of those we love. Often it is out of love also. But be tolerant. Understand. The material world is a place of thick conditioning. So when someone is not behaving towards us in a way that is so sublime or palatable, we should be understanding. Okay, no problem. Don't let it disturb our consciousness. This person, I'm not coming back to the temple and doing so. Why you're taking yourself out of it? Because this, go and serve the Radha Kundriya. Okay? Yes.
So, in service, if you are a witness to a distressful situation that is occurring, you remain tolerant, but how does that individual who's causing the distress, like, it's not, the position of a witness to correct the behavior, but how does it ever get corrected, or how to
You have to look at
purify, or how to...
You have to look at your position. Right? We told this story of Rath Yatra many years ago when some disturbances came. No, he said just tolerate. No, that wasn't the right thing to do in that situation. The right thing to do is extract that situation as quickly as possible. And that's what happened. Right? So, you have to look at your position. What is your role in this process? If I have some management responsibility, then my job, your job, whoever it is, to create a peaceful, cooperative, collaborative, and loving environment. Right? So, but you have to evaluate, what is my role in this? Okay? So if I don't have that responsibility, then you have still a great opportunity. And what is that opportunity? Pray for that. I think that's a top. That is actually the most powerful means to fix the situation. Prayers of the Supreme Lord to the Supreme Lord are so powerful. So if you're not in a position to directly intervene and fix that situation, pray for that person. But what we often do, we criticize that person. We criticize the person. How is that going to help? But if a devotee prays for that person, this person is a little bit misguided. They're creating some disturbances here. I pray that they can purify. imagine if we all did that. What would Krishna do? What would Krishna do? Help. Prayers of devotees are so powerful. So know our position. If you're in a manager position, you can't say, oh no, I should tolerate it. No. Like the Kshatriya doesn't tolerate aggressors in society because they have a responsibility to protect. But if you are not in that position and you are a participant, don't try to interject yourself as that either. Right? So know, where is my role in this situation? Of course you can try to indirectly help. Sometimes you can support the recipient of that distress. Help them. But prayers are very powerful. But unfortunately we don't have such faith in them. But actually time and time again we see the prayers of devotees are answered by the Supreme Lord so magnanimously. Tolerance? Anybody finds it easy? It's not. But
Particularly in Grasta life.
hmm?
Particularly in Grasta life.
You said it, not me.
Somebody had to. Better me than you.
That's what I said. To those we love, we have the least tolerance. Our spouses, our children, our parents, our brothers, we're tolerant when the neighbor acts like a dum-dum. But when someone else we love, we lose our tolerance. So,
Question, Prabhu.
yes.
If one feels that one is being taken advantage of now, is it the ego thing that one feels that you are being taken advantage of, and then that's one question. Second is in that situation one still remains being to be tolerant. Sometimes one feels that one is one being exploited in a way, in a very subtle way. So how do we still remain tolerant in that case?
So, obviously it's very circumstantial, right? Based on the circumstance. Tolerance doesn't mean somebody is, putting me in like harm's way, I'm just going to tolerate it, right? There is an aspect of self-preservation, protection, keep oneself out of harm's way, right? So don't, someone is mentally or physically abusing me, I have to protect myself, not just tolerate that. So this tolerance can go to, again, and that's where, again, management and role comes into play, that we don't just tolerate atrocities, right? So there is an aspect of that we must be very mindful of, that, we have to protect ourselves in devotional life, but how we do so is very important. The skill of doing that is important, and often it means extracting ourselves from those dangerous situations, not necessarily, fighting back in the means. But I know that wasn't your question, but I just wanted to, address that so that we don't take tolerance, because any of these points you can take to sort of a, in an inappropriate place or a place that doesn't work. So this is not and ever suggest that one should tolerate, sort of things that are not appropriate. Now when it comes to somebody taking advantage of us or using our situation, it takes a lot of introspection to understand, I'm doing this service, and someone else is asking me to do it, but they're getting all the benefit, the credit for it, and I'm just being used to make them look good. I'm just making up an example. That's a good position for us to be in. It takes us to the point of knowing to detach from the credit of service, because we should always know. Who knows? Who has perfect knowledge? Krishna does. And that's what matters. That's what matters. So, in circumstances when, I'm trying to serve, and somebody maybe is thwarting my service, maybe. Krishna knows. what my intention is. I don't need to make it so known. This person did this to me, so I couldn't do that service. Nobody, why? Because Krishna knows. So when we remember that, it gives us great comfort, right? That, yeah, I mean, someone is taking advantage of my, work or activities. So be it. Krishna. Okay, but again, there are times where that gets into a point of where no, that must be stopped and corrected. So we have to, it's very circumstantial.
So that is coming from pride actually.
Yeah, and it's coming from a misplaced intent of the service. Why am I doing it? And the reason I say it's a good position to be in, because it teaches us to know, to realize, I'm only working to please Krishna. Right? I'm only working to please Krishna. So when we get in those situations, what it does, it's painful, it hurts. But that hurt is good. Like when you go to the gym and you exercise, it hurts, it breaks muscles. But they come out stronger. So that situation, it actually, again, when it's not in a point and it's like catastrophic to us, is very powerful because it helps us singularly focus on what our goal is. My goal isn't to get credit for this service. My goal is to please Krishna. So, yes, I did all this service, and someone else is being glorified for all. They're taking advantage of that situation. It's good. I have less chance to get puffed up, and I have more chance to realize my goal is to please Krishna. Right? So it helps us purify the intent of our service. So when those things come, we should embrace them actually, because they help purify. Doesn't mean it's not painful. It is, right? But work through the pain and clearly understand my opportunity there. But always take great comfort. My greatest well-wisher, my beloved Krishna, he knows. After that, what can we not tolerate, actually? What can we not tolerate? If we know the material world is constituted to give us setbacks, and we know Krishna is always there, and who is the perfection of tolerance? Prahlad Maharaj. Right? So, tolerance is very powerful. And lack of tolerance is equally debilitating.
It's a wonderful chapter. I felt this is one of the most introspective chapters.
Yeah. This verse is very powerful. And Prabhupada's purports are just so spot on and so precise and very, what I consider practical, right? These are all applicable in our day-to-day life. Okay? So, we got through 2. Next week we'll get through more. These are the 3 very, very powerful ones: humility, tolerance, and non-violence. Sometimes as devotees, we think, I'm non-violent. I'm plant-based. The violence we do is inflicting emotional harm on others. Let us work to rid that tendency and be loving to all. And if we are on the receiving end of some disturbances, pray for them, be compassionate, tolerant. And also at times, protect yourselves from not by putting up, the defensive, but maybe extracting yourself from those situations. Any other questions or comments? Sharon?
I was trying to do a check mark of how many things I'm even close to starting, and I don't even see a single one out there. Because none of these things we seem to have.
So how are we going to get them out?
Chanting.
Really, really, really good, powerful chanting and following the instructions of Guru. By following the instructions of the spiritual master, one receives great mercy and potency. So the spiritual master has given us relatively straightforward instructions, but those instructions carry mercy. So all of these qualities will manifest when we chant our rounds nicely, follow the four regular principles strictly, render devotional service as instructed.
Not too difficult.
Sorry, not so complicated. Not so complicated. Because what is complicated? Trying to be humble, trying to be tolerant, trying to be this, trying to be simple, trying to be that. That is complicated. But executing these three make the complicated very easy. By the mercy and power of Guru and Krishna. So when you did your assessment, it's good to have that assessment. Now we know the tools. Chant, regular principles, render service. Follow those strictly. Everything will.
And a perfect segue to the next activity.
Yes. Chant. Srila Prabhupada ki
Ki
jai.
jai.
Koti Vaishnava vrinda ki jai.